My name is Justin Gage, and you're tuned in to the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast with your host, Jason Woodbury.
Hey, glad to have you tuned into Transmissions this week. Our guest on the show today is Ben Chasny of 6 Organs of Admittance. His new album is called The Veiled Sea, and it's out this week via Three Lobed Records, the always reliable Three Lobed. 6 Organs can sound very different album to album. There are sort of quiet acoustic sketches on some of the stuff, or long blown-out psych epics on others. This one's sort of a whole new thing entirely, with really wild, glam-inspired solos and sort of insane riffs. Plus there's a Faust cover. I really dig this album. Chasny stopped by to discuss it, as well as his long tenure with the legendary Comets on Fire. If you want to hear more from the Comets camp, we've got an interview with Ethan Miller in the archives. Ben also joined me to talk about his trio with Sir Richard Bishop and Chris Corsano, Rangda, and the dubious freak folk term. We get into a lot more, including Oumuamua, the interstellar scout, and some other far-out topics. So I hope you enjoy this one. Before we head in, remember, rating and reviewing the podcast makes a huge difference. Share it on your social media pages. Share it via whatever platform you have access to. We count on word of mouth, and so if you enjoy Transmissions and you enjoy our talks week after week, please do what you can to get the word out and help others get turned on to what we are doing. If you want to take your support even deeper, Aquarium Drunkard is on Patreon. All right, I will speak with you a little bit more on the other side, but without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Ben Chasny of 6 Organs of Admittance. I've been a big fan for a really long time. It was a real treat to have him on. Thanks for tuning in. Speak with you more a little bit on the other side. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast. It's real nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So before our interview, you emailed to let me know that though you are in Northern California, you haven't seen any you haven't had any Bigfoot sightings. So you short-circuited my first question. That's what I was going to ask you to start. Have you seen Bigfoot? But other than that, how are things in Humboldt County?
No, I've never seen a Bigfoot. And I've never been particularly interested in him either, which is interesting as he's quite popular around here, you know?
Yeah.
But it seems like there's been more and more interest in him, especially with that new show that's going on.
Yeah. A show which I don't know if you've watched it yet, Sasquatch.
Yeah, I did. I saw it.
So you know, the Bigfoot thing is not. He's like a metaphorical device for the show. I feel like, as much as he is a character. But that's cool. But that you grew up in the area, right?
I did. I grew up here, and then I left about 20 years ago.
Wow.
Came back.
You came back just a couple years ago?
Yeah, just like a year and a half ago.
What brought you back after all that time living in other places? I mean, you've lived all over, but what brought you back to the area?
Mostly family. My family's still here. So I kind of moved back to the town to be closer to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like it? How do you like being back?
Oh, it's nice. It's a beautiful area, you know. And then more and more friends are coming in to the area, and that's pretty cool. So Yeah, well, mostly it's nice to be close to my family.
Yeah.
I don't really go out into the towns or anything. I just stay at my house and hang out with the family and things. I mean, the idea was that I would be here and then just go on tour, but that has obviously not happened at all. So,
Well, right. Did you feel like it was a good place to ride out the pandemic or the weird year?
yeah, for sure. I mean, the population's pretty small here, and there's so much countryside, and we've taken quite a few trips to the beach, which is only like 5-minute drive from here, and it's been pretty mellow.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So the new record, were you working on the Veiled Sea at home during the pandemic, or was it more or less wrapped up before things got strange?
It was probably 60 or 70% done, and then I finished it up last year. So
I mean, you've got, there's this record, there's a new Bums record, your group with Donovan Quinn. Was that also done over the course of the year?
No, that's been done for a while. It's that the new Bums record just took us a while to finally wrap up, basically, and we just kind of did some final mixing on it. We were trying to get it done before a tour that we did in November of 2019. We did a living room tour of the West Coast, and we couldn't quite get it done. And then we were just going to release it on cassette. And I thought I would just ask Drag City if they wanted to do it. And then they said, yeah, they would do it. So that's kind of how that one ended up coming out.
Are you typically the kind of artist who does a lot of remote recording and remote collaboration, i.e., you're recording stuff, sending it to friends, or friends are sending stuff to you for your records? Are you pretty comfortable working that way? Because a lot of people had to get comfortable working that way over the course of the last year in order to, do things. Was it similar for you?
Donovan and I had been doing that for a bit with New Bums, so that was kind of my first experience really working like that in collaboration. When I did the August Born record with Hiroyuki back in 2001 or 2002, I didn't really have a setup where I could record. And I would go to a friend's studio and we would just record over the top of each other on a CDR and send it. So there was no mixing to do at the end of it. It was really primitive. So when we were done with the record, we're just like, all right, it's done.
Yeah.
Just get them after. There's no mixing. And that's how that record was done. So I've kind of had a bit more unorthodox ways of recording long distance in the past.
So with the Veiled Sea, was this stuff that you did in your home? This is all home studio stuff?
Yeah, it was. Most of it was done. I thought it was going to be the next I was recording it as the next Drag City record. And then everything kind of got pushed back Drag City wise, because I thought that Companion Rises was going to come out in November, and they told me, no, let's push it to next. They got a bunch of people in November. So Companion Rises got moved to 2020. And then when Corey asked if I had anything, then I thought, oh, well, yeah, actually I have half of a record already recorded. So I'll just finish this up for you, Corey.
Cool. I'm curious if you go in with a concept for most records, because obviously that's something that you've done sometimes. You sort of have like sort of frameworks that you will build into what you're doing. Was it like that with the Veiled Sea, or was it a little bit more freeform?
It was a little conceptual in that my idea was to take some of the themes from the previous record, Companion Rises, some of the more like astronomical themes, I guess you'd say, and continue those, and even continue the more electronic aspects into it, which is something I don't usually do. I don't usually like to continue a theme or continue sounds from one record to another. I like to kind of jump across in terms of sounds or genre. Like if I do a harsher rock record, the next record I kind of like to be acoustic. So I did that kind of for the first time in a while on this.
Well, there's a bunch of things I'd love to explore there, but I'm curious about what it is that generally speaking, when you decide, okay, I want to flip the script, I don't want to follow along with the ideas of the previous record, What do you think is sort of behind some of the thought process? Do you just like the idea of not getting stuck in a certain mode? Is that maybe the reason that you tend to go that way, or is it just a little bit more personality style where you just want to get out of one framework maybe in your head and into another? Where do you think that sort of comes from?
It's probably more of trying to get a sense of balance, and trying to balance out tones and sounds. And I think it's more of trying to get just a sense of balance rather than being like purely contrarian or trying to throw people off my tail, or
sure,
you think I'm like this, I'm not like that, I'm like this.
Yeah,
I do.
There's a fair amount of that in your discography too, though.
There probably is a bit, but I like the idea of balance. My dad's a mechanic and a car mechanic, and he although actually he's certified to work on aircraft, but so he's a mechanic, and so one thing I learned early on as a kid is when you put on a wheel to a car and you're putting on the lug nuts, you don't go around in a circle. You go from one side to the next and you kind of go back like that. So I've always thought of the records coming out to have a total balance on everything I do, to kind of go across the wheel, in terms of sound.
Right. Well, this record is awesome, and you shred a lot on this record. There's like some pretty like overt, glorious guitar fireworks happening on this album.
Thanks. That's because of that guy. I got that. For people just listening to the podcast, I'm pointing over my shoulder to a Jackson King V guitar that I got, and I thought, well, if I got this Jackson, I should probably do a little more guitar solos than usual. How did the Jackson enter into your life? Did you go to a guitar shop and say, I'm taking this one home, or how did it find its way to you? We have my partner, Elisa, her friends are, they're very good at finding guitars. And I just put it out. I said, I've always kind of wanted one of those pointy guitars. Find me a pointy guitar? And they said, we found this Jackson. I'm like, all right, yeah. Get that Jackson pointy guitar for me.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned your partner. I think I haven't gone back and checked. I think you might be the first spouse of another guest that we've had on the podcast. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, that's cool.
Maybe. But anyway, the Jackson guitar, let's just say it's a pretty it's a stylistic choice. It's definitely a very striking looking instrument. Are you drawn to Strange or somewhat, I think I've seen you a fair amount of times, and I think it's usually, normal looking guitars, whatever that means.
I've been playing a Strat with the humbucker at the bridge for like 10 years now. And I usually do play just Strats. No, I originally wanted it for a Rangda guitar because I thought it would be really fun to play that while Rick plays his red kind of semi-hollow body guitar. So I was thinking more visuals. And then I also was looking forward to showing up at a Rangda practice with that guitar for all the ridicule that I would get from Rick.
Yeah.
For showing up with that.
Until you start to play, and then he'd have to concede that this is a shred machine and that it was the right choice on your part.
He's always trying to get me to play bass. And if I showed up with that guitar, then it'd be, hey, I'm not playing bass. That's what that said.
Have you been able to connect with him and Corsano over the course of the last year?
Just through text and email.
Yeah.
But we haven't done any music, although Chris and I have been talking about the need to probably do some music pretty soon. Those
records are so wild and so fun to listen to. It does sort of feel like there's a little bit of a slight overlap between the Veiled Sea and some of the Rangda stuff, just in terms of the sort of exuberance and the celebratory quality. For you, it was a weird year. I think that's putting it lightly, but it's interesting to see what kind of stuff people have come up with during this last strange stretch of time where a lot of people were working at home, and a lot of people, I think, felt completely free to shake up their routine and to throw off any sort of assumptions, that somebody might have about their work.
Right.
Did it feel that way for you? I mean, did you feel like was working on this record, the parts of it that were done in, quarantine or whatever, did it feel at all like an escape from what was going on in the world, or a refuge or anything like that?
It did not.
Yeah.
I wish I had a refuge. No, it didn't. It felt pretty, because that's kind of how I record anyway, by myself, in my room, and so it didn't seem that different to me.
Yeah. Well, coming off of Companion Rises with the sort of themes that you were talking about, I found that very, very interesting, the sort of astronomical, the stargazing element of stuff. There's a great interview that you did for The Quietus where you talk a lot about how that's something that, you sort of found yourself looking up. Was that connected to being out in a place where there is just less light pollution and you were able to see the stars in a more meaningful way?
Yeah. I mean, that's how it started when I was growing up. I grew up in a very rural area with no light pollution and nothing to do, and really only one friend. I mean, it was really, really, kind of farmland area. And that's just what I did for entertainment, really, is I did a lot of stargazing. And I had a really cheap telescope, and I would even do drawings that I would try to draw like Jupiter and the moons, and try to look at the Orion Nebula and things like that. So that's some of my first entertainment, really.
Yeah. What was it like getting back into it? Is it a situation where, like, what's sort of like the optimal conditions for you in terms of stargazing? Do you like try to, there was last year, there was like the Saturn Jupiter conjunction, which was this really cool moment that I know for me, like it was like appointment viewing, I was like, all right, we're going to go out and try to see it. And we did. And it was remarkable and cool and exciting. I mean, are you sort of like, do you have like a star calendar of events that you're trying to pay attention to?
No, I just have a app that kind of tells me all the big things that will be happening for the month. And sometimes I'll go and try to see them or whatever. Where I'm at right now with my house is a little bit of light pollution, but I can go up this hill or this mountain and kind of see stuff a little bit better. I probably just go outside of my house, outside of my door more. Definitely, I can see the stars a lot better than I could in Seattle or a lot of San Francisco or other places I've lived.
Yeah. Well, there was a song on Companion Rises that referenced Oumuamua, which was, I guess, we've talked about it on the podcast with a former guest, with Ken Lane of Desert Oracle Radio, and we talked about the scout. That's the Hawaiian term for scout. Are you drawn to weird sort of stuff like that, anomalous stuff, or what's you're not afraid to explore all sorts of interesting esoteric ground. So I guess what I'm getting at is your interest more astronomical? Is there an astrological sort of thing to it for you, or is this strictly science based?
Well, I wouldn't say astrological, but it may be more hermetic based, or I have fun with those ideas within a record, but they don't necessarily represent exactly my viewpoint on how things work, but they can provide points for a story.
Yeah.
And I was kind of working with that. The Oumuamua, like, it was a funny idea that some people thought it was a spacecraft. And then I was kind of riffing off of the Simpsons idea, like about, welcoming our overlords. So the idea was that I would write a song in case this was an alien spaceship.
Yeah.
That, well, it's just a funny song, but if it really was, then I would say, well, I wrote a song for you, so don't get mad at me.
You mean in case if they were showing up to like, wipe us out or whatever, you wanted to be one of the humans that they said, okay, this guy can stay because he wrote a good tune,
right.
a good
Exactly.
tune for us.
Exactly. But of course, I mean, this is a joke as well.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not really serious. Taking from, welcoming our overlords. So
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that like that idea of having esoteric and conceptual frameworks to pull from for records is, I mean, it sounds like you've got, at least from the outside, it seems like a fairly idyllic situation where you've got, a nice place to be and, books and pointy guitars and stuff. So do
what else is there? Books and pointy guitars. I mean, that's,
you got it all, but does it feel like on the sort of creative writing side of the records that it's fun to draw from that stuff, occult stuff and science fiction frameworks and all those other things, just as a way of exploring ideas that maybe it would be harder to get to, without utilizing that kind of far out language or far out terminology or even just the ideas?
Well, the idea of that song in particular is also sort of nestled within the framework of the entire record, which was I moved back to California. So I wanted to do a record about California, but, it seems like every fifth record has some California reference in it. And I didn't mean it in a Beach Boys way or a Weather way. I was specifically framing it in sort of the weird California way, actually in a way that, Eric Davis, the writer Eric Davis, talks about a lot about how strange California is in terms of all the weird things that always go on, And so that song, that song was about that asteroid or whatever, but it was a part of a bigger record of just the weirdness of California and how, sort of like UFO cults and all of that fun stuff. Well, not fun when they all commit suicide, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The weirdness of California. And so it was a part of that.
Yeah.
It was a part of that. So, and that song was actually written from the point of view, not of me, but I tried to write it from the point of view of a UFO cult.
Yeah.
So I tried to write the chorus as if that's how a UFO cult would write it. Not that I'm a part of UFO cult, but again, it's a story.
Sure. Yeah. No, we had I did an interview with Eric Davis about his great book High Weirdness, which is
fantastic.
I'm in the middle of listening to the audiobook for like a second time. I just decided I'm just gonna keep like feeding that information into my brain, because at least for me, hearing those stories, thinking about that history, the countercultural history, I'm always surprised when it comes out. You know what I mean? You input it, and then what comes out sometimes in, either interviews or writing or anything, it's like you can be really surprised by some of that stuff. But it is fascinating, and the place, California, has this rich tapestry of strangeness and weirdo ideas and out there is like baked into the place. Did you have a sense of that growing up there?
I don't think I had a sense of it while I was growing up, but it wasn't until I moved away and I was looking back on California. And when I was doing the Companion Rises record, I hadn't read his book yet. And then after I read his book came out after I recorded it and I read his book after I recorded the record and did some promotion. And now I just reference the book. Now, instead of me trying to explain, now I can just say, "Oh, just go read High Weirdness by Eric Davis." That's the California I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When I was writing about a California record, it's like Eric Davis does it very, very well.
Yeah. When we ran we shared the video for 101 on Aquarium Drunkard, and I think the reference was like, from the state that gave us the Integratron, Philip K. Dick and whatever, and it's like very much that thing of the place is a strange place. You've obviously worked with a lot of people who aren't afraid to explore the strange in all sorts of ways. We've already talked about Richard Bishop, and who I interviewed Richard Bishop on stage at Pickathon, and
I saw that interview.
Okay, so you know that it was not the easiest interview I've ever done, because he's a trickster, he's like very but that ruled, but like, I talked with him a little bit about his occult book selling and all this stuff and his antiquarian stuff. So you've got him, and then I was thinking about other folks too. Obviously David Tibet, who we had Will Oldham and Matt Sweeney. I talked with them about Superwolves, and I cut all this out of the interview because it was a complete tangent, but they started talking to me about Current 93 and just sort of like the vast universe of what he does. And I thought about how you've been involved in that, and I just wonder, do you relate to people when you're in a band with someone? Obviously it's about a lot of different factors. It's about how you guys get along on a personal level. It's about how you get on a musical level. But I wonder, do you tend to notice commonalities in terms of sort of conceptual ideas with the people that you play with? Either David Tibet or Ethan Miller or any of the folks that you have kind of had these like relationships with musically?
A little bit. It's probably different with David Tibet and Rick Bishop, because I had been listening to their music for so long before I even met them or started collaborating with them. So they had already influenced my direction in certain ways, guitar style or certain interests or whatever. So is it sort of easy to lock in with what they were into once I met them and started playing music with them. And they still influence me in stuff and inspire me. I mean, David Tibet himself is such he's mad genius and so prolific and works so much. Like, I can't believe he's either doing a book or another record, and it's always new. He's very inspiring to me.
Yeah. When you start playing with somebody who you've listened to for a while, what is that like? Is it daunting? I have to imagine that you have to do you have to turn off a part of your head that's like, for lack of a better term, like the fanboy part of your head? Do you have to sort of figure out how to kick that person out of the room so that you can focus on, being like a present collaborator and facilitator of their ideas?
It probably depends on, like with Rick, we were sort of friends by the time we started playing music. So yeah. I didn't really have that. With Tibet, when I started playing music with him, I was more of a fan. I was a little intimidated to start playing with the band, but just kind of got into the groove. But then, almost in the same way, the guitar player before me, Michael Cashmore, his playing was very inspiring to me, and I picked up a bunch of moves from his stuff, especially on the record of Ruiners and Blazing Star, with more classical style finger picking. It was really inspiring for my playing, so it was a little bit easier to just kind of get into the lane of what I should be doing.
When you've played music as long as you have, do you find that? Well, I'll put it a little bit more basic to start. I mean, do you practice a lot? Do you like run scales? Do you try to learn other stuff? Or when you talk about like stepping into a role where there's a little bit more classical involved, or obviously you're a finger picker, but what's your relationship like with the sort of woodshedding side of things at this point?
I used to sometimes I would go a month or two without playing the guitar. And I mean, that has been one change for the last years. I play guitar every day now, for pleasure and to learn stuff. And I sit down to practice now, and I try to better myself as a guitar player a little bit more than I used to. So
I might be a little off on the date. Did the hexadic, like the musical notation system, that entered the picture around 2015-ish? Is that about right?
Yeah. I think that's when the book and the record started coming out. I was working on that pretty hardcore for about 2 years before that. And then it came out around 2015.
Well, for listeners, who don't know don't know exactly what I'm talking about, could you explain it a little bit? What the actual it's a notation system where I'm terrible at music theory, so
Well, that's okay because it has nothing to do with music theory.
Okay.
I've had people who are very, who definitely knew their music theory and thought, oh, send me the book. And I said, it's like, what? This is not. It's actually, it's not anti-theory, but it's its own thing, really.
Yeah. Well, tell me about what inspired you to want to create something like that. I mean, was it sort of a reference to? When I think of sort of like, I guess I immediately thought of when I learned about it stuff like like oblique strategies or these sort of things that people will like the thing like sort of a conceptual. Almost like a game which you could play with yourself in order to generate musical ideas. Or was that sort of it? Was that the way you thought of it when you started working on it? How did you decide to start working on it, or how did that happen?
The idea, and this sounds like a myth, but it's very true. The idea came when I had 2 mornings in a row where, as I was starting to wake up in that state, I just kind of had a dream about composing with a deck of cards, and that's all I had. And then I had the same dream the next morning, and that's when I thought, oh, I should try this out. Like how could this work? And there's also, Mozart had a game where he was, you could compose with dice, you'd have phrases. So nothing. It's that idea in particular isn't that new. But I needed to figure out how it would work and what the framework would be and whatever. So I started to experiment with different things. And the first structure I had, the first time I tried to see if it worked, first maybe I should explain what it's basically just composing with a deck of cards, but it's where each card is a specific note. Including it's very octave specific. So you will have a card in one octave, but that doesn't mean it's the same note in the next octave. And then, so that's the most general way I could describe it. And so when the first time I started fooling around with it, I kind of came up with this idea. Now let's see if this works. And I did a certain thing. And when I played it, it reminded me of the band Comets. Stephen O'Malley's kind of, I don't know if they were before Sun, maybe at the same time. I'd seen him play a few times. And that was, I don't know if it was just because exactly what I was doing at that time reminded me, whatever, it was a sign to say, keep going.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning of the project.
At what point did you, or rather, how did it happen that other people, I think including Stephen O'Malley, ended up sort of utilizing the cards to create some stuff? Did you immediately start sort of sharing it with people, or did you sort of envision it more as a personal thing at first?
I shared it pretty quickly. I shared it with a bunch of friends and everything. And the people who wrote back to me and were positive about it, then I kind of asked them if they might want to do something.
Yeah.
And then and the people who didn't write back, then I just left them alone.
Yeah.
It was kind of
yeah. Well, so it literally came to you in a dream, 2 dreams. What were you feeling at the time musically? Around the time that you had those dreams, were you feeling stuck at all musically, or frustrated, or have you put much thought into sort of analyzing maybe what was going through your head around that time?
No, I don't remember. It was right after the first New Bums record, which I think came out in 2014. And the 6 Organs record that had come out before that was the Ascent record, which was more of a rockin' record. I think I was just reading more texts that had to do with combinatorial methods, not even in music.
Yeah.
And so that kind of led into a lot of it.
And then you made a handful of a couple records that bore the name of it, and then was Companion Rises the first record you did, kind of coming out of it?
No, there's one I did. No, I did another record, the one with the bird on it.
Oh, yeah, a threshold.
Yeah. It's such an awkward title for a record. Yeah, Burning the Threshold.
Burning the
That
Threshold, which is a
I
great.
happen to get it myself.
That's a great album, right? And that had a bunch of different collaborators, really, really cool people. Riley Walker,
Yeah.
Circa Dayu, like all these, like that. That's a fantastic record. What was the when you decided to put the deck of cards away for that one? What inspired that choice? Was it just wanted to try another approach?
Yeah, sort of back to when I was saying I like to go across the wheel. The Hexatic records were so almost atonal that I wanted to get back into more of a folk type of record, something a little easier to listen to.
Well, that's a real warm and inviting and very balmy record. You know, that's a really nice mode. I think that is sort of the kind of some of the earliest stuff that I heard of yours, kind of back around like Arthur magazine days, you know, when I would just like get that magazine at the record store that I worked at and just like circle, like I would just go through and just like try to find anything that sounded cool, you know. And I think I got introduced to some of your stuff, maybe even the compilation that Devendra Banhart put out, you know, and it was kind of more in that kind of folky mode, but you've never ever been somebody who will stick in just one mode. Do you think that's an outgrowth of your life as a musical listener? Because you also are pretty all over the map when it comes to your musical taste.
I think so. I mean, it's just me. The band is just me, so it really frees me up. I'm not arguing with anybody over what stuff should sound like, and there's no sense of, well, I have to make this one thing better and better so that I get more and more people listening to me. I mean, Richard Youngs is a hero of mine, and so in terms of music, in terms of how he decides to do records, and he has an idea and he completes it, and they're always amazing records. And I sort of, I wouldn't say I model myself after him, but I'm inspired by the way that he does music.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. When you start digging into a record, how, you know, we talked a little bit about the conceptual frameworks and how you kind of like to employ themes and certainly, you know, specific ideas on albums. If you aren't going into them with that stuff sort of mapped out, what does the process look like in terms of sort of figuring out what a record is about? Is it just do you do a lot of demoing? Do you do a lot of improvisation? You know, what is sort of the way that a record comes together for you?
Usually just sort of have a core idea and let it form. A lot of the early stuff, definitely a lot of the first few times I would go into a studio, I only had a few ideas, and I would go in there, like School of the Flower, Sun Awakens. I just had a general idea of what I wanted to sound like, and I would let the studio take care of the rest, and inspiration in the studio form what it was going to be like, basically.
So you mean you'd put some stuff down and then sort of just start building off of that?
Yeah, I would only have a couple riffs or whatever and go in and let it form in the studio.
Was that nerve-wracking at all in terms of putting yourself on the spot, or was there something maybe motivating about that for you?
I think I was just pretty cocky, and more than anything, and thought, I could do this, whatever. And it worked for a few, you know, most of the time it worked. And then I probably started to get scared, you know, look down off the high wire and be like, this is pretty scary. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I'm going to map some stuff out a little more.
Where do you think that cockiness was established? Were in bands previous, you know? Because I mean,
probably alcohol, probably just too much drinking. I got this. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
you know? I don't know. I mean, I'm joking about being cocky. I don't know. It seems like I must have been pretty cocky to think I could go in there and get away with it. Maybe because on School of the Flower, I did that and I thought it came out pretty good. And then I just thought I could do that. And then after a while, I thought maybe I should plan some stuff out a little bit more.
So, do you feel like there's other projects, that exist for you aside from Six Organs, usually collaborative projects. Do you ever find yourself working on stuff that you think, because Six Organs is just you, in your mind, could anything you do be a Six Organs record? Or are there things where you do something and you just think to yourself, this isn't, for whatever reason, part of the Six Organs, under the Six Organs banner, or things like that?
Yeah, Six Organs definitely has its own thing. And on my computer, I have a file for Rangda demos and riffs and things and different projects. And back when I was playing with Comets, it was definitely like, oh, this is a Comets riff and this is a Six Organs. In my mind, they're always very separate.
How do you know what's what? It's just intuitive?
I usually sit down thinking of I'm going to I don't usually sit down and ask the heavens for some inspiration, and something's beamed into my head, and then I think, what is this for? What is God trying to tell me? I focus a little bit more, and I think, oh, maybe I should work on some Rangda stuff, and then I'll maybe write a riff or something in that style.
Yeah. And then with Donovan and doing New Bum stuff, is it just sort of more traditional song-based stuff where you're just like, okay, this is definitely where this one's going?
Yeah, New Bums is really easy because it's mostly me going through Donovan's songs.
Yeah.
And then me being like, all right, I'll take this one, and I'll take this one. All right, thank you. And then I'll write one or two songs for the project. That's kind of what the band's about.
Yeah. The bio for the New Bums album says something like the return of the duo that no one asked for, or something. And I found that there is a really like there's a charm and a humor to the New Bum stuff that I really, really appreciate. And I like that the two of you seem so in a kind of, it seems like it's a pretty natural collaboration. How did you guys first start working together?
Well, the early stuff was because I lived next door to Donovan, basically, in San Francisco. It was technically 2 houses away from him, and we didn't really know each other very well. But I just started inviting him over to my house, and we would play in the garage and just play the acoustic guitar together. And this is sort of how we became friends.
Yeah.
From playing music, and we'd be drinking a little bit and just getting to know each other. And that's how it started. I have those early demos. They're pretty funny. Some of them made them onto the first record. And so maybe because the band and the friendship kind of formed at the same time, it kind of has that vibe.
Yeah. Well, it's a great vibe. Thinking back to some of the earliest stuff I heard of yours, obviously, aside from the Six Organ stuff, it was the Comets on Fire stuff. And there are, on The Veiled Sea, also some moments that sort of remind me of Comets, just in terms, maybe it's just because you're a lead guitarist in the Comet stuff on records. Like, you joined with Blue Cathedral, right? Is that right?
I became a full-time member with Blue Cathedral, though I played a couple of the guitar solos on field recordings from the song.
How did you hook up with Ethan and those guys?
Ethan grew up in the same town that I grew up in, but we didn't know each other at all. He's a little younger than me. And then he moved to Santa Cruz before I moved to Santa Cruz. And then when I moved to Santa Cruz, part of the reason was because there were friends down there from my town, and he was one of them. And it was fun to hang out. And then I really liked Comets on Fire, and I wanted to be in a rock band. So I took the lazy way out, and instead of trying to form my own band, I basically forced my way into Comets on Fire. I remember I wrote a list of cool bands that had 2 guitar players, and I gave it to Ethan, and I said, all right, just take a look at this list. Just think about it. All right, you just think about it. And basically just forced my way in there. Do
you remember any of the bands, cool bands with 2 guitar players on? Do you remember any of the bands on that list?
I remember Crazy Horse was on it.
Yeah.
That's the only one I specifically remember.
Crazy Horse is truly one of the greatest two guitar bands of all time. We had an interview that by the time this one airs, I'm trying to make sure that this is true in my head. By the time this one airs, that one will have already aired, so we can reference it safely. But
cool.
But I talked with Jim Jarmusch about Crazy Horse a bunch, and the film that he made about him, Year of the Horse, is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest. It's a great rock doc in my opinion, because it's just like one seared, fried, mood of these dudes playing together, and Crazy Horse does that. The Comets stuff has it's not the same at all. It doesn't sound like that, but it does have that sort of sustained intensity. But I remember when Avatar came out, it was clear that all of a sudden you guys were kind of trying some other stuff too. There sort of was like this, some of the more delicate textures on that record. It's still wild at times. That was the last Comets record, right?
Yeah, that was the last Comets record. The interesting thing is that a lot of the quieter sounds from Comets and the quieter songs, people tended to think maybe they were from me because I was from Six Organs, but a lot of them were from the drummer, Utrio, and he would write the stuff. So if a song had piano on it, it was Utrio had written it, and he had written it on piano, and we would switch live to do that as well. I was the one in the band who was always trying to play faster because I already had Six Organs, so I didn't want to be quiet. And then so we would play. I'd say, no, let's do this really super hard, fast. I wrote the song. It sounds like Motorhead or something.
Yeah,
that was what I was trying to do because I already had Six Organs.
What was the first stuff that made you want to play guitar? Was it stuff like that? Was it Motorhead, kind of crazy? What were some of the first things that inspired you to want to pick up a guitar?
Do you mean when I was a kid?
Yeah.
Stuff. It would probably be stuff that my dad was playing. He was always playing music, and actually Crazy Horse would be one of them. I mean, one of my first memories is hearing, maybe not one of my first, but one of my early memories is hearing Live Rust at an extremely loud volume. In that house that I said, we grew up in this rural area, so he would just turn the stereo up so loud. He had a really good stereo, and so that's how I experienced that record for the first time. And so hearing stuff like that, very loud stuff. Was
your dad ahead? Was he a music listener?
Yeah, he was. He was into Nick Drake in the 70s, and he was in all this really good music. But he told me it's because he grew up in LA, and I don't know what radio station it was, but that's where he was getting turned on to all of this good jams. He said there was some radio station in LA, and he would listen to it, and that's how he got turned on to good music.
I'm trying to imagine what just a commercial radio station turning me on to like Nick Drake and that. Neil for sure, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. Yeah, he said he remembers the day that he saw an article that Nick Drake had died, and so he was already tuned in at that time. So I grew up with. It was a lot of guitar rock, so it's kind of natural that I went that direction.
How about some of the first stuff? What did your first bands sound like, or your first musical outings?
Well, I don't know if we need to go there. They were really cool.
Yeah,
they were really really cool.
I'm sure. Well, was it like punk stuff that sort of inspired? That kind of got you. Yeah.
Just a mishmash of stuff. Just a mishmash.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. At what point did you start to feel like you sort of had a handle on what you wanted to do? Sort of whenever it matured beyond that thing. When did you start to feel like you sort of had a sense of who you were as a player or as a songwriter or as a musician?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there was ever a realization or if it was just a slow, long process of evolution,
Yeah. So at that point, what was the first sort of scene where was the first scene that you sort of found yourself enmeshed in? Was it Southern California?
No, it was in Northern California.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
In my hometown, and I was in a band with actually a trio who ended up playing drums in Comets. Some of my first bands were with him that were more punk bands, you know, and we would play locally. And actually Ethan was kind of in that scene as well, a little bit younger, and he was in his own bands. Yeah, there was sort of a punk scene in Eureka, California.
Okay, so there was sort of a scene. Was it at odds with the Northern California? I mean, were there hippies around who didn't like the punk thing? Was there any weirdness?
No, there was a good punk scene, and I'm going to wrap this around to the beginning of this interview and mention that if you noticed in the Bigfoot documentary, Larry Livermore is in there, and he ran Lookout Records.
Oh yeah, okay.
That's the guy who started Lookout Records. So there was sort of a connection with the Bay Area, East Bay punk scene. So a lot of those bands would come up and play.
When the quote unquote freak folk thing started to sort of happen and was sort of recognized as a thing, did
What
that?
is that?
You've never heard of the term freak folk?
No.
It was a little used music critic terminology that
I think I might have heard. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, once or twice it might have been applied to you and some of your friends. I wonder if there was any sense at that time of sort of a return to that weirdo California, or not a return rather, but did you sort of view at all what you were doing in terms of being part of that lineage of the sort of strange California counterculture thing?
No, I didn't. And I mean, even that term freak folk, it's not because I don't want to be labeled anything. I never felt, first of all, I just don't, it's kind of an embarrassing title. There are a few titles for genres that are as embarrassing as freak. To me, it just doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
Like, black metal, that's a cool title. Oh, we're black metal. That sounds cool. That's tough. Freak, I just didn't really, and also it's a bastardization of free folk, which I did feel a part of, which is more Matt Valentine. I think Matt came up with that term, and that is supposed to represent, well, it's folk music, but it's running parallel to free jazz. It's free folk where things are open.
Yeah.
And that I appreciate. There were festivals like free folk festivals, and somehow that term got changed to freak folk. And so that's one reason why I didn't really like that term very much. And yeah, when I started doing Six Organs, I was more influenced by the people on the East Coast anyway. Even Matt's band Tower Recordings. I mean, there were two people, Tower Recordings and Joshua Burkett, and they were doing records that I loved so much. And I thought, well, I want to do music like this. This is what I really love this stuff. And that's, later I became friends with those guys, and I felt those people were, I felt my comrades.
Yeah. So the freak folk thing kind of, I mean, in addition to it being like a strange designation that you didn't identify with, you feel like it almost sort of stripped away some of the intent of MV's more descriptive free folk meaning. But at the same time, I guess what was exciting about that stuff, and it was a term where if you would have asked me in 2006 or 2005 or whatever, do you like freak folk? I would have been like, yeah, it's my favorite, whatever, because.
Yeah. And I just want to say, I'm not putting down.
No, sure.
And certainly people listen to Six Organs that never would have listened to it. I appreciate that. So I'm not.
No,
crap on the term.
Genre is always that's one of the reasons why I appreciate your discography so much, because, and we've had people on the podcast and genre comes up sometimes, but I try to not get too hung up on those designations because they're also arbitrary. None of them mean anything, and they are sort of marketing terms as much as they are anything else,
Right. Well, I mean, to me, there's a difference between genre and a scene.
Mm-hmm.
So if a genre is supposed to be somewhat of a horizon of expectation for the listener, they somewhat know what to expect from this term of the music that they're going to get. But a scene can be a bunch of people who don't necessarily share a genre, but they share common ideals or locations. That's why I feel my scene, mostly the people on the East Coast doing music.
Yeah.
And even Texas with Charlambides. I mean, that was that was more of a scene, which I think, I kind of just mentioned this to somebody, I don't know, in an interview, but I'll mention it again. That I think that's what David Keenan was trying to get across when he said New Word America. It wasn't supposed to be a genre, as in this, because all of his bands sounded different to me, but they were all coming from, they play shows together, a lot of the shows, and it wasn't a genre. And so I definitely felt like I was a part of that scene, but I did not feel like I was a part of the freak folk genre.
Yeah. You were more drawn to the ethos of, as a musician, you can draw from wherever you want to draw from, without there being any sort of boxing in of that sort of thing.
Yeah, especially since those people who, Matt Valentine and, a lot of it centered around Byron Coley had space, he had space out there. And it's very record collector oriented in the same way that you could say Sonic Youth is a record collector oriented rock band.
Yeah.
So this was doing, and that's not to say the other people weren't collecting records. I know they were, but it's very fueled by record collecting. I mean, the Odd Space itself had amazing records, and people would go there. And Corsano was working at the Odd Space.
Yeah,
people were collecting records like mad, and that was a big fuel. Let's experiment. Let's do this new thing. Let's do this new thing. And so that's why it's harder to call that a genre, because as a listener, if there isn't that horizon of expectation of what it's going to sound like when you put it on, all you know is it'll kind of be a little bit of this or a little bit of that.
Yeah. It seems like, so, part of the thing that was associated with all that was people like Thurston Moore were certainly helping to bring, the John Fahey's of the world to people who might not necessarily know that stuff, because there was an introductory quality to it. But it doesn't seem to, it doesn't seem to me like even the quote unquote, American Primitive or Guitar Soleil or any of those terms, it seems like just the same way that you maybe necessarily didn't worry about freak folk so much, you didn't necessarily worry about those designations either, right? Did you see yourself in lineage with people like, well, maybe certain guys you did, Basho or something like that. Is that, I guess you helped get that Gary Higgins record out, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Such a good album.
It's a beautiful record. I love it. It's interesting because as I've been doing music, people have been calling my music different things.
Yeah, exactly.
As it's gone along. So in the early days, it was more classified with that sort of finger-picking style. And then it changed to freak folk, and then it's kind of that tag kind of sticks with it. No matter how many noise records you put out, you're still going to go, which is fine.
You've got a Faust cover on this record, like you're yeah.
It's changed. People have called it different things at different times.
Yeah. How do you feel with the designation rock and roll? Because this is sort of a rocking record in a really exciting way. Yeah.
I'm fine with rock and roll. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as such a noted, listener, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a little bit of to close out what you've been digging lately. Have you been listening to anything particularly cool that you might want to share with listeners?
Let's see.
It's a dreaded question. Every time I ask somebody, and every time I'm asked, my brain just goes completely blank. So.
Yeah, it's the same reason why it's best to make a list of records you're looking for when you're headed to Amoeba Records before you step through those doors. Because I step through the doors at Amoeba and I suddenly forget everything I'm interested in.
That's right.
Or looking for,
Yeah, you're screwed because it's just, And then you just have to wander around and see what's going to pop out or whatever, which is nice too, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Or, hopefully somebody who works there and you go up to them and be like, what are you listening to? What should I get?
Yeah.
It's the best thing to do. I've been listening to a lot of the Freedom to Spend, everything on Freedom to Spend that's been coming out. And I picked up that new Charmaine Lee record, which is really badass and incredible. And that's what I've mostly been listening to now. Oh, and this band Shackleton, which is more of a more English, more electronic English kind of stuff.
Okay, current stuff.
Yeah. He still does records. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar at all. The electronic elements on the new record are also very exciting. Which is to say, I don't know that there's any direct connection, but a
little bit. I've been listening to more electronic music probably the last 6 or 7 years, maybe. So
yeah. Do you find that you're pretty omnivorous, where you do tend to listen to stuff from all over the map still, or
probably all over the map?
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I just, like anything, I go through phases where I don't listen to anything new, and then all of a sudden I have to get a bunch of new stuff and devour it, and that's all I do. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and to hang out.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love doing these, especially with people like you who just have been around and continued to surprise. That's the thing I appreciate so much about your work and so much about your ethos, is that if we could go back in time and find young me with my Arthur magazine stashed under my arm or whatever, and played this record, I don't know that I would have known, how to reconcile these two bands, But I guess at the same time, what was so cool about stuff like Arthur magazine or, the various labels that were putting stuff out back then, is that there was a lot of variety. So I don't know, maybe I was getting into Sun at the same time. So I think you can wrap your head around it.
Arthur was good. Sun was in Arthur too. And they did a CD, because Arthur used to do those comp CDs. So I believe, and I could be wrong, and somebody could tell me I'm wrong, but I believe I have been on more of those Arthur comp CDs because I was on Ethan's, and I was on Devendra's, and I was on Al Cisneros's. All had 6 organs.
Okay. So you're...
And yet, Jay never asked me to do one. Just joking, Jay.
Well, he lives down in Tucson, so I think when we hang up now, I'll drive down and I'll knock on his door and say that not only does he need to reboot Arthur because we need it, but also he's got to get you to do a comp.
The reboot was great. He did kind of do that reboot and it was looking amazing.
Just like 2 issues, or maybe just 1, when it was like magazine or newspaper size, and it was like a fold out. Boy,
it was so good.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Well, we'll have to bug him. We'll have to get him to come on the podcast.
You should. That would be awesome. That would be super awesome.
He rules. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
That's going to bring this episode to a close. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Jason Woodbury. I write, host, and produce Transmissions. Audio editing is by Andrew Horton. Sarah Goldstein and Jonathan Mark Walls produce visual work for the show. This week's interview was transcribed for Aquarium Drunkard by Ella Fortney. Our top of the show announcer and executive producer and Aquarium Drunkard founder is Justin Gage. Tune in every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. California time for the Aquarium Drunkard Show on Sirius XMU. Next week On the show, we'll be joined by music maker, creative thinker, and DJ Carlos Nino. It's a really far-out conversation about music and mysticism and creativity, and I really, really enjoyed it. So stand by until then, but we will speak again soon. If you absolutely can't wait until next Wednesday, there's plenty more to hear in the archives, stuff you might have missed. So check it out at Aquarium Drunkard or wherever you get your podcasts. Scroll back there. Lots of interesting talks. Okay, stay safe until then. Speak more soon.